Well, good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, depending on where you are. Um, Welcome to the session 11, the Interdisciplinary and Climate Research on Resilience. I'm Gordon McBean.
Mark, ale powiedz mu, że teraz nie ma jeszcze.
Ja sobie poradzę, no.
Ale powiedz.
Anna and anyone who's not speaking, could they mute themselves? And please remember to unmute yourself when you need to speak. This is Renee.
Thank you. Everyone should be muting themselves, and unless you need to, you don't need to have video on because that takes up time. So we've got people still coming in. We're up to 73 participants, but I'd like to get started. Just to say that, first of all, I welcome you all as the chair of this session. The co-chair of the session, whose voice you've heard, is Professor Renee Seiber of the University of McGill University. We've got Hao Li doing all the computer work so that the PowerPoints will be presented through his site. So you don't need to share your screens, anyone. When we get to discussions, we'll use the chat box. So if you have a question for the speaker, don't raise your hand because we can't see that. But if you enter a chat message, then I will look at them at the end of each, as we get in through each speaker, and we can ask the questions as the timing is available. So everyone, please mute your audio unless you need to speak, and no videos. So if we could go now to the next slide, is just next, please. Oh, sorry. Okay, we're now on the just to give you a quick background of this. We are talking about the number of damages and the hazardous events in Canada, and they're increasing dramatically. The projections for the future are very dependent on how resilient we make our society. Next. It's interesting to look at the Global Risks Report of the World Economic Forum. This was actually released just before, in January 2020, so some months ago, but just before COVID became the big issue. But you notice, we'll go to the next one, please, that the ones that are in the upper right corner are the ones that are, by their assessment, most likelihood in having biggest impact. They are climate action failure, that's no adaptation, no emission reductions. And the one that is most likely with high impact is extreme weather, but also biodiversity loss, and etc. Food and water crises as well. Next. These things, according to their analysis, are very linked to issues of governance at all levels. If we, next. And these things come together. So we need to look at the issue in a very broad sense. The last 5 years are the five warmest years on record. We are dealing with, as the Secretary General of the United Nations said, climate change as the defining challenge of our times. And he called for a number of actions. I won't go through these, but just to say one of the things we need to do is bring the science together to address the Global Agenda 2030, which includes the Paris Agreement, the Sendai Framework for Action on Disaster Risk Reduction, Sustainable Development Goals, and others, and bring together projects globally and in Canada. Next. When we talk about interdisciplinary and climate research on resilience, we really need to look at the issues of resilience and adaptation. And that means we need to look at our changing climate hazards, and we'll have here talks on that. We'll hear ones about exposure and vulnerability and risk. We need to think through how you implement these, monitor the success of them, and work together to modify them as appropriate. Next. And just to say, as our last slide, we need to go from sessions like we're having here to action. We need to look at the COVID-19 situation to build back better through these various international agreements. And just to say, this morning session we'll have in a second Francis Weirs, then Don Martin Hill, then Charles Lynn, Dale Begwin, and Natalie Carter talking about those issues in the upper left. And then after lunch, you'll rejoin us after a brief break with Roger Pilvarti, Paul Kovacs, Anna Duitepstap, Renee Seiber, and Paul Godin talking about those issues.